President Biden's transportation secretary, Pete Buttigieg, who is openly gay, happily married, and a devoted father of two, was recently asked to address the homophobic rhetoric and record of the newly elected Republican Speaker, Mike Johnson. But before we unpack all that, if you haven't yet, please hit that like, subscribe, and the alert bell. All right, folks, we've got several things to look at, including a few clips, the most compelling of which is Pete Buttigieg's response when he's asked to address Mike Johnson's homophobia.
We have a new Speaker of the House, Mike Johnson from Louisiana, and the K-File here at CNN reported that back in the mid to late 2000s, he worked with a group that promoted conversion therapy, the idea that people who are gay can be turned not gay. And this is something that's been widely discredited and considered dangerous over time. And back then, he's quoted as saying, quote, homosexual behavior is something you do, it's not something that you are. And since he's been confirmed as Speaker, just last week, he did an interview where he talked a little bit about this. I want you to listen to what he said.
When the Supreme Court issued the Obergefell opinion, that became the law of the land, okay? I respect the rule of law, but I also genuinely love all people, regardless of their lifestyle choices.
Regardless of their lifestyle choices, he said, which is very similar to what he said 15, 20 years ago when he was working with groups pressing conversion therapy. What do you make of that statement?
Look, I've often said if being gay was a choice, that was a choice that was made way above my pay grade. But my lifestyle is that I'm a dad. I'm a married father of two, a beautiful boy and girl, twins, 2 years old. And our family deserves to be protected. It deserves to be supported, just like every American family. Most Americans get that. Most Americans believe that. I will admit it's a little bit difficult driving the family minivan to drop our kids off at daycare, passing the dome of a Capitol, knowing that the Speaker of the House sitting under that dome doesn't even think our family ought to exist. But that's one of many, many reasons why I'm grateful to live under the protection of the Constitution, which, according to the Supreme Court, established our right to have that family, and serving under a president who is making sure that everybody is included and protected, including families like mine.
So that is a characteristically gracious response, in this case to a profoundly disgraceful sentiment, as my buddy Luke Beasley points out. And listen, Secretary Buttigieg says a lot of important things there that we need to unpack before we address Mike Johnson. So first and foremost, he talks about how the vast majority of Americans get it. They support same-sex marriage. Now, poll after poll after poll reaffirms that truth. Recent polling has the support for same-sex marriage anywhere between in the 60s all the way up to near the 80s, right? So the decisive, overwhelming majority of Americans support gay marriage. But there are some troubling statistics as well, because recent polling also indicates that even in just the past year, there has been a substantial dip in support for same-sex marriage among Republicans. Republicans saying they found same-sex relationships acceptable dipped over the last year from 56% to 41%. That is an alarming statistic, right? It's also alarming that you have other powerful conservative figures, right? Not just members of the public, but powerful conservatives like Justice Clarence Thomas. In the 2015 Obergefell decision, he's actually targeted it for potential reconsideration. In the 2022 Dobbs decision, which overturned Roe v. Wade, Justice Thomas wrote a concurring opinion in which he said perhaps the court should reconsider rulings which protect same-sex marriage, among others. So then Secretary Buttigieg says, well, President Biden's doing everything he can to protect gay marriage, which is true. So in 2022, after Thomas made those remarks and Roe v. Wade was repealed, President Biden had Democrats in the House and the Senate whip up legislation to try to protect in federal statutory law same-sex marriage in the event that Obergefell was overturned. And thus the Respect for Marriage Act was passed. But the only way to really get it through, to get enough majorities, because unfortunately there again you won't have certain Senate Democrats, like at the time Kirsten Sinema and Joe Manchin, willing to break the filibuster to pass this on a line majority, a partisan line majority. So certain concessions, unfortunately, were made to certain Republicans to secure the majorities to get it to pass. So the Respect for Marriage Act essentially says if the Obergefell decision is overturned and the Supreme Court no longer respects federal protections for gay marriage, then the Respect for Marriage Act will require all 50 states to recognize gay marriage if it's performed in a state where it's legal. So let's say Alabama, let's say they no longer recognize your right to have a gay marriage, but you do get married in California. Then Alabama is forced to recognize that marriage, but it doesn't require Alabama to allow same-sex marriage in its own state. So it is a half measure at best, which is why we should hope that the Supreme Court never overturns Obergefell. Which then brings us back to Speaker Johnson, right? So Mike Johnson does have a long history of some pretty rancid remarks about same-sex marriage. He wrote in editorials in Shreveport, Louisiana, that he called homosexuality inherently unnatural and a dangerous lifestyle that would lead to legalized pedophilia and possibly even destroy the entire democratic system. In another editorial, he says your race, creed, and sex are what you are, while homosexuality and cross-dressing are things you do. This is a free country, but we don't give special protections for every person's bizarre choices. Absolutely despicable, but there's more. And this, covers a wide array of issues. So I guess we'll skip to just the part about same-sex marriage, because obviously he's a socially regressive conservative in all respect. He has no respect for trans rights, among other things. But with respect to just gay marriage, he voted against the Respect for Marriage Act. Okay, so even now he doesn't really oppose or support any sort of federal protection for gay marriage. Now, in the clip we just saw of Pete Buttigieg, he was looking at a clip from an interview between Sean Hannity and Mike Johnson. And Hannity asks him about his history of homophobia, and this is what Mike Johnson has to say.
Quote, no clear right to sodomy in the Constitution. You have been getting hammered on this.
Yeah.
And I want to ask you about it. I want to know exactly, where you stand. Some of these comments were 15 years ago.
I don't even remember some of them.
I don't even remember some of them. How weaselly and pathetic is that? Either because you don't care or because you've made so many over the years that you've lost track of all the homophobic remarks you've made. Or perhaps you're just lying to try to downplay the fact that you are a dangerously regressive right-wing religious conservative, and now you're the most powerful elected Republican official in the federal government. Very dangerous. Now, in response to all this, President Biden and the Democrats have released this ad targeting Mike Johnson as we head into the 2024 election year.
If you don't think that moving from Kevin McCarthy to MAGA Mike Johnson shows the ascendance of this movement and where the power in the Republican Party truly lies, then you're not paying attention.
Here's what's going on. The GOP conference is changing.
If you change the definition of marriage, then you open the floodgates for chaos and sexual anarchy.
Marriage is one man, one woman. They changed the definition of marriage that had been regarded by basically every human society for 5,000 years.
Mike Johnson, he is a fantastic gentleman, and I think he's going to do a great job.
Roe v. Wade gave constitutional cover to the elective killing of unborn children in America. You think about the implications of that on the economy. We're all struggling here to cover the bases of Social Security, and if we had all those able-bodied workers in the economy, we wouldn't be going upside down and toppling over like this.
He was one of the leaders in decertifying the election results.
I don't concede anything. In Georgia, it really was rigged.
Smart, sharp.
He was the chief whip for Donald Trump.
You helped lead the efforts to overturn the 2020 election results.
Next question.
So what they're gambling on is the idea that Mike Johnson, even though he doesn't have Jim Jordan's name recognition, that he's such a fanatic that if we can get the public to be aware of him, that it will help turn the tides more in favor of Democrats as we head into the 2024 election. And I hope they're right, because Mike Johnson is a zealot, he's dangerous, and there is no place for him in the halls of power as far as I'm concerned. You let me know what you think in the comments about Secretary Buttigieg's response and about Mike Johnson's record. Let me know what you think in the comments.